Hey everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of 252 Theater Online. We're so glad that you could join us for this weekend. We've got an awesome story all about this month's big idea, creativity. Creativity is, of course, imagining what you could do because you're made in God's image. It's pretty cool to think that all of you kids and parents watching were created in the image of God. And speaking of creativity, I could use your creativity to help me solve a little problem. I'm on a different monkey diet, and so I've come up with a fun game that actually has everything to do with today's story, because today's story is all about salt. Salt and light, to be specific. But in today's game, what I'd like to know from you is which of these food items has more salt or sugar? Are you ready? Here we go! Okay, so our first item is going to be guacamole. I would like some more of that guacamole. Okay, does guacamole have more salt or sugar? What do you think? If you think it's salt, hop to your feet. If you think it's sugar, put your hands on your head. What's it gonna be? It was salt! Way to go! All right, second one, it's gonna get even harder from here. The second item is broccoli. I know, you might not like broccoli, but if you had to eat it, would you be having more salt or sugar? What's it gonna be, ladies and gentlemen? If you think it's salt, hop on one foot. If you think it's sugar, put your hands in the air like you just don't care. And it's salt! Oh, did you get it? Way to go, guys! That's awesome! Okay, next item. Here we go. This one's gonna be a little bit tricky. You never know what curves I'll throw at you. How about this? Ketchup. Does ketchup have more salt or sugar? What do you think? What do you think? It's delicious on fries. Fries have salt, but then again, who doesn't like it on a brownie? Wait a second. Do you eat brownies with ketchup? Okay, anyways, the point is, which one is it? If you think ketchup has more salt, how about you put your hands in the air like you just don't care? And if you think it has more sugar, hop to your feet. What's it gonna be? And it's sugar! Did that surprise you, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, this is the last one. Ask the people you're playing with how many they've got right. Is anybody in the lead in the room? Here we go. This is the last one. Chicken noodle soup. Does it have more salt? Does it have more sugar? What's it gonna be? The last one. If you think it has more salt, stand up and act like a chicken. If you think it has more sugar, sit down and act like soup. Okay, you don't have to do that. Which is it gonna be? It's sugar! Can you believe it? Oh my goodness, that's so crazy. Yep, we did a little test called Google, and it's true. Chicken noodle soup has more sugar. Who knew? Well, hey, thanks for playing our game. We hope you had fun, and I think you'll enjoy today's story where you'll get to learn how to do a little experiment of your own. See you guys later!
The Bible. It's 66 books of history, stories, letters, and poetry that fit together to form God's one big story. The epic adventure of how He created us and loves us so much that He made a way to rescue us. As we travel through the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, we discover people who met God and found their lives changed forever. And now for an amazing story.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to this weekend's 252 Theater service. We're so excited. In fact, I'm just so privileged to get to tell you today's story because actually it's one of the things that I really love to do. It's a science experiment. I don't know if you guys like to do science experiments at home, but this is a really fun science experiment. I'm going to actually show you how to do the experiment, show you what you need, and at the same time tell a Bible story. Now the Bible story comes out of the book of Matthew, Matthew chapter 5, and it's an awesome Bible story. It's a story about Jesus. Is one of Jesus' most famous messages. Jesus had been teaching, and he went up to this kind of mountain or hill, really, to do some preaching, and so appropriately this is called the Sermon on the Mount, because that's where he was. And so in Matthew chapter 5, we hear the story. Before we get to that, I want to tell you what you need for your science experiment. You're going to need a light bulb. It doesn't have to be a light bulb as big as this. It can be a small LED light bulb like this. You can usually find one of these like in your automotive department or in the back of your mom's car, like where the blinker is. Ask before you grab it. You're also going to need some like tongue depressors, or they don't have to be this big, but something like that. You'll need some wire, just some spare wire, a 9-volt battery, and then finally some aluminum foil to use, okay? So that's what you're going to need. Now, like I said, our story for today, Matthew chapter 5, we hear we pick it up in Matthew chapter 5, and what we're reading about is how Jesus is talking about how to be a follower of Jesus, like how to follow him, how to live like he wants. He says, blessed are the meek. That just means that you're not weak, but you don't flex your strength to make others feel bad, like you help other people. He says, blessed are those that are persecuted. So he goes through this long, long list, and then finally he talks about how to live like a Christian, how to model the way Jesus lived, right? We talk about this in 2v2 all the time. We talk about how we should treat others the way we want to be treated, how we need to make the wise kind of choice, and of course how we should trust God no matter what. But in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 13, he gets to the part that we're going to talk about today. He says, you are the salt of the earth. Now, Jesus made some funny comparisons in his time, but comparing you and I to salt is kind of silly, right? I mean, what does that even mean? It doesn't make a lot of sense to us now, and that makes sense, but it really makes sense. It did make a lot of sense back then. See, right now, you can find salt pretty much anywhere, but back then, salt was actually really, really valuable. In fact, I would say, this might be overstretching just a little bit, salt could have been as valuable as gold. I mean, it was a big, big deal to have salt. And here's why. There was no refrigeration back then. So if you wanted a steak, and come on, who wouldn't love a great juicy steak right now, right? Let's say you got a whole ton of meat. If you don't eat that meat very quickly, like within a few hours, that meat would look like this. I mean, just horrible, terrible, rotten. It would be really, really bad. And so, of course, that was not a good thing, especially in a place where they raised animals. So what they would do is they would cover their meat with salt, and the salt would suck up the moisture and would turn it into jerky. Now, if you're following along, first thing I want you to do in our experiment is we're going to take this tongue depressor. We're going to take our little wire that we have here. We're going to wrap it in aluminum foil. So, like I said, when Jesus is comparing people to salt, it's really important for us to understand what Jesus was actually saying is he's saying, hey, listen, you have a lot of value. God has put in you value. He has put something in you that's really valuable. Now, if you read in Matthew chapter 5, he says, you are the salt of the earth, but suppose the salt loses its saltiness again. How can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything. It will be thrown out, and people will walk all over it. Now, what is Jesus saying there? Well, I think what he's saying is, listen, if you've been given specific skills by God and you use those skills for God, that's awesome. But if you decide you don't want to use those skills, well, it'd be like wasting something really valuable. It'd be like throwing money on the ground, right? People would walk over money. Can you imagine that? But that's what Jesus was saying. He was saying, hey, listen, don't waste what God has given you. And that's actually kind of what we've been talking about this month, right? We've been talking about creativity. Creativity is imagining what you could do because you're made in God's image. So because of that, because you're made in God's image, the cool thing is every person, no matter who they are, is valuable. Isn't that great? Okay, now back to our experiment. I have a tongue depressor wrapped in foil, and I've got my wire coming from that. I'm actually going to do the same thing with a second tongue depressor. I'll take a tongue depressor. Make sure you put this wire out along the depressor, and you get a lot of good contact between your aluminum foil that you wrap around it and that wire. Now, another thing you could use, if you want to make sure that wire doesn't slip out, is some electrical tape. And you can tape that down onto the wire, and that would be great. But the important thing is you want that aluminum foil to be touching the wire, and it's going to be your little paddle. Okay, so back to our story. We're talking about the story of Matthew chapter 5, and Jesus compares us first to salt. Go ahead and put your little prongs away. You're going to use those in a minute. let's talk about the other thing Jesus compares us to in Matthew chapter 5. Jesus goes on and he says, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill can't be hidden. Now, this explanation makes a little bit more sense to you and me. It makes sense to us because we've seen lights and we still use lights. So what I've done here is I have taken, for my big light bulb here, I've taken my 2 tongue depressors, and when I touch them together, you'll notice my light comes on. So every time those 2 things touch, see, once I touch these 2 paddles together, you get light on the light bulb. That's pretty cool. Now, for you guys, you're going to want to take the 2 things that I did right here. These are the other ends to our prongs. And if you just attach it to the battery, you're going to have light running through it, but you'll want to attach it to your light and kind of make a loop. That's what I've done here. I've made a loop here so that the battery goes to the light, and then I've got it going from here to here, so whenever I touch these 2 together, you get light. You can do that same thing with a smaller bulb and with the 2 things that you've made in your 9-volt battery at home. Now, the thing is, you can just hold it on, you can tape it on. What I actually did is I bought one of these. You don't have to buy one of these. This is just something that attaches it to the 9-volt, and then I use these wires to attach it to my wires that go to the little paddles I built. Okay, so let's get back to the light, right? Jesus compares us to a light. Now, let's just put these 2 together. This makes sense. Jesus is saying, you are the light of the world. So, since these are touching, our light is on, right? You're the light of the world. Now, listen to this. This is interesting. He says, also, remember he said, if you don't use your saltiness, it's thrown out. He says, also, people do not put a light or a lamp and put it under a bowl. They don't light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand. Now, wouldn't it be interesting if I told you guys, hey, I've got this really cool light. I've got this fun experiment. This big bulb is powered by a 9-volt battery. Isn't it awesome? What do you guys think of my light? Isn't my light so cool? And Jesus is saying, hey, that's not what you do with light. You don't cover it up. Of course not. You guys can't see it. I mean, it defeats the whole purpose. Why have it lit in the first place? Jesus is saying you wouldn't do that, and that makes sense to us. When you go out at night and you are driving up on Wichita, you can see all the lights in the distance. When your parents are driving at night and you come up to a stoplight, we don't put something over the stoplight because we need to see what it says. Is it red? Is it yellow? Is it green? Which one is it? And that's the same way Jesus is saying, hey, listen, when you light a light, you don't cover it up. And he's saying we shouldn't do the same thing. In fact, he's comparing us to a light, saying, hey, don't cover up the goodness that God has put in you. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, I think it's interesting because we're going to do one last thing to sort of show how this experiment works that you can do at home, but also, I think, explain what Jesus is trying to say. Now, remember what I told you. I told you guys that Jesus is taking the time to tell everyone, hey, this is how you can live if you're going to be a Christian. If you're going to follow me, this is how I want you to live. So I think it's important that we remember that. Remember context. That's what it means. Like, what was Jesus talking about before he compared you to salt or light? That's really, really important. It's important for science to know the context of an experiment, but it's really important for the Bible to know the context of what Jesus was saying. Just what was he talking about before? Well, he was talking about living for God, right? Living like Jesus. So for our experiment, I'm going to take this bowl, and I'm going to fill it with, I actually have distilled water. You don't have to have distilled water. You can use bottled water. You can use tap water. It won't work quite as well, but the purer the water is, the better it will work. Now, if you notice, when I put these on opposite sides of my bowl, there's nothing. There's no light. But we're going to add something to this bowl that's going to help. See, there's no current passing from this paddle to this paddle because there's nothing in the water. It's totally pure. But if I add something to the water, say if I added salt to the water, all of a sudden what you're going to see is this light. It might be kind of dim, but especially as I start mixing up this salt into our water, it gets brighter and brighter and brighter. Now, remember how he said salt? When Jesus compared you to salt, he's saying, hey, I want you to know you're valuable. You have something unique about you that God put in you. You have there's a part of you that God put there, right? So maybe you're good at art, or maybe you're good at writing, or maybe you're like me and you love science. That's great. You love doing experiments and you love doing fun things like that. Well, God put that in you, and that's great. That's really, really valuable. But the other thing God's saying, the other thing Jesus compared you to was a light. You are meant to be a light in a very dark world. You are meant to be a light that points other people to Jesus. And when you do that, something really cool happens. You shine a light. And I think what Jesus is trying to say is there's a connection between what you're good at, the part of you that God put in you, and shining a light and telling others about Jesus. Our bottom line today is this. God created you to share his story. And the truth is that I really believe that every kid watching this, every kid that comes to New Spring on the weekend, every person has a part of them that's creative in a different way. They're created by a creative God, and so they can do amazing things. Maybe you're good at art, maybe you're good at drawing, maybe you love science experiments. I remember when I was a kid, I would go to the library, this was before the internet, and I would buy I would rent all kinds of books about science experiments and how to make slime and how to do this. I was into slime before slime was cool, okay? I love science experiments. But now, it's not just that I get to do fun experiments, it's that I get to do fun experiments to share God's story. See, the part of you that you're good at, the things that you like to do, maybe you're good at sports, maybe you're good at music, whatever you're good at, God wants to use that to share his story. It's valuable, but part of what makes it so valuable is you are meant to use it to tell other people about the most important thing ever, and that is Jesus. Isn't it cool now that when I was a kid, I was into that stuff, but now as an adult, I get to use science experiments to tell kids about Jesus? It's not just that. God has used a lot of the things, a lot of the experiments that I've come up with and the fun thing, the object lessons I've created to not just help people here, but all around the country. God has used that because I use my gift to share the good news of Jesus, and he wants to do the same thing for you. Maybe you're trying out for soccer and you're really good at soccer, but what if you use your position on the soccer team to talk to other kids about Jesus? What if you said, hey, I'm always going to try hard in practice because the Bible tells me to do everything as if I'm doing it for Jesus. Maybe you're good at music and you love to play music, and as much fun as it is to play Taylor Swift, there's nothing wrong with that. What if you use your gift to play music that talks about how wonderful and amazing God is? You can do that because God created you to share his story. Let me pray for you. God, thank you for these kids that are watching. Help them to know that they are created to be creative. We are given the gift of creativity so that we can share with others the good news of Jesus. So do we pray? Amen.
Thank you so much for watching this week. That was really interesting, all the things that we got to do, and we hope that you enjoyed them. But you know what? It is so true. God created you to be the salt and to be the light of this world. That's right. And here's the really cool thing, is when things seem weird, when things seem dark, that you can spread God's light. God created you to share his story. And we hope that you do that. And one way to remember to do that is by doing the experiment that we did today. So if you do that at home, if you figure out how to make a light bulb light up with just some salt and water and a battery, that'd be really cool. We'd love for you to share that with us. But we hope that you had a lot of fun, and we hope that you are encouraged and to know that you can make a difference.